I hope you've had a very gratifying day, that you've learned a tremendous amount, and that you're ready to go forth and conquer. And in furtherance of that, I would like to present this panel on negotiating salary, compensation, and benefits. So my name is Melissa Reardon Henry. I'm the General Counsel at Northeastern Illinois University, and I'm going to ask the rest of the panelists to introduce themselves to you in turn.
Good way to check mics, too.
Yep.
It's working. Hi, I'm Mary Harvey. I'm Associate Provost here at the University of Chicago. And you wanted me to say something about, do I have to say more?
You can introduce yourself now. Or you
Okay, I have had a checkered career. So I just, because since we're talking about negotiating, a very checkered career. I'm an art historian. After I finished a master's in museology, spent a bunch of years in a museum, and then decided I wanted to go on and get a PhD, and came here to the University of Chicago to get a PhD. And then I taught in a variety of one-year positions at different schools in the greater Chicago area, and decided that was going to go nowhere in terms of a tenure-track job. And so left that dream behind and ended up in foundation relations here at the university, and one day got a call to apply for the associate provost job. And in 1998, I became associate provost here, and I've been in the provost office ever since. In those many years in the provost office, I've worked a lot for many years on faculty appointment cases and reappointment cases and promotions. And now I work principally on the arts and on our initiative to bring more women onto our faculty, and to create a climate where all of our faculty can prosper.
Hello everyone, I'm Michael Knitter. I'm the Executive Director of Compensation and Benefits for the university. What does that mean? Well, there's two main components. One on the benefits programs, that is all the health and medical programs, retirement programs, work-life balance programs, employee assistance, to life insurance, to disabilities, time off, and dealing with numerous items within the legal realm of federal compliance within all those areas. The other area of compensation can be new for people, as far as when you're entering a career, that organizations have people like me and who have staff who put together for leadership throughout the university or the organization that they're working, compensation structures to pay people the value and the worth of the position. And how do you fit into that across the entire organization, from an internal equity aspect within the organization and an external equity? How do you compare the position, and how does that match up with positions that are similar outside of that organization, let's say the Chicago greater area or the Great Lakes area, or if it's a bigger position even nationally. So that gives you a little realm of what I do for the university, and I'll turn it over.
Good afternoon. My name is Joy Walton, and I'm a managing director at Huron Consulting Group, so a little bit of a different perspective than my colleagues here at the table. Huron is a consulting firm based here out of Chicago, and we are one of the few firms that have a dedicated higher education consulting practice. I'm fortunate to be one of the founding members of that practice and have been there since the beginning. And today I hope to bring some very practical tips, especially if you're looking outside of academia as you do your job pursuits. I've been fortunate to help oversee the hiring. We've gone from 200 to 2,000 employees in the last 11 years. So I've been on the employer side of negotiating a lot of those hires, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of those experiences with you today.
So I have three questions, one overarching question for each of our panelists. And I just mean to set the table for our conversation. We welcome your participation in this. This can be an interactive program if you would like. So if you have any questions, or if you would just want to interject of a salient point that you think we're overlooking, please do so. And Brooke Noonan is back there with the microphone, so wave your arm and she'll come. But just to get us started, Mary Harvey, would you let most recent degree recipients entering the job market feel very lucky when they've gotten an offer for a faculty position? Is it okay for them to negotiate? And if they can negotiate, what kinds of things might they negotiate?
Yeah, it's okay to negotiate. You absolutely should be negotiating. You're already negotiating in your lives all the time. And so don't forget about the need to negotiate even when you're looking at that first job. I told you a little bit about my checkered career, and I want to say in that connection that I am perhaps the worst negotiator I've ever met personally. So I want you to take in what I say and pay no attention to what I've done. A first academic job, of course, is a very special moment in your lives. Many of you, depending on the field you're in, will be happy just to have an offer. You're in a field where there are a lot of candidates and not enough jobs to go around. Others of you will be in a field where you'll be entertaining several offers. Some of you may feel that there are equally attractive options for you to pursue outside of the academy, so you're coming from different places. And your interest in negotiating and your capacity to do so is likely to be affected by your situation. It's likely to be affected as well by the situation of the academic institution that's making you the offer. So you need to keep in mind what's possible for them. The University of Chicago has a few more resources to put on the table in a negotiating situation with a new candidate than a small private school or than a large public school. So you have to be aware of that as well. I have two areas I'd like to cover a bit today. First, I want to say something about what you can negotiate, and then I'd like to just share with you some thoughts on how to negotiate. So, for what to negotiate, everything is negotiable. Everything is negotiable. Salaries are fairly standard for first jobs in the academy. You should know that. Chairs and deans will generally expect to make essentially the same offer to all junior candidates coming in any one department or school. That said, your primary leverage for upping the ante in your salary will be any competing offers that you may have. Obviously, if you have a couple other offers in the offing, you got a whole lot more leverage in a negotiating situation. If we get more on the wild side, on the money part of this, some people get signing bonuses. One doesn't think of that in the academy, but the fact of the matter is that in some areas, signing bonuses are offered. I've seen staying bonuses, particularly in lab sciences. An institution invests so much money in setting up your lab that they're really interested in having you stay so that they don't have to set up a new lab for someone else in 3, 4, 5, 7 years. So sometimes people can ask for, a salary supplement, a one-time salary supplement each year over some period of years, marking the landmarks because they stayed around. And of course, summer salary support is also something that can be negotiated on the money end of things. But there are many other factors to compensation besides money, and I want to sort of run through some of these. Now, many of these may or may not be possible in any particular situation, but I think some of them may be things that you haven't considered. Some simple ones. Will they pay for your trips to campus, to select housing, to find school for your kids, whatever? Can you get some support for those trips you have to make? Will they pay for your moving costs? How much will they pay for your moving costs? Are they setting up an office for you with the computer? Or maybe you need a laptop too. Can you get 2 computers? Or what? What do you need in your office? How about leave time? Not a surprising one, but this is an area in which you can and should negotiate. Your teaching load or specific course assignments. Are there courses you really don't want to teach? Courses you really do want to teach? Maybe you want to make that part of your negotiation. How about a research fund? At our institution, that's quite common for faculty. A research fund that will support your travel to professional conferences or for your research work, that'll pay for books that you buy in your field, that might give you the money to hire a research assistant, so on. Or perhaps a research assistant in its own right is a negotiating item for you. A housing subsidy. I wonder how many of you have thought about the possibility of asking for some support for buying a house or for renting a house or whatever. And maybe, I was trying to really think outside the box a little bit, maybe you're interested in some sort of intra-institutional affiliation. For instance, maybe your department expects you to teach 5 courses a year inside the department, and you'd really like to teach one of those courses of the year in their race center. Would they be willing to let you teach one of those courses in the race center and still give you credit towards the 5 courses you have to teach in the department? So that kind of thing. You need to think about everything. Let me get into a few specifics depending on field here. Is there anybody here who's a scientist? Yeah, we got some scientists back here. So you may be already more aware of these things, but of course you're going to negotiate for the lab space that you need and getting enough lab space for yourself. You're going to negotiate for various kinds of startup funds, including the costs of moving your lab animals, perhaps, and all of your lab setup costs, the purchase of additional equipment that you may be needing for your research, hiring of a lab tech. Maybe you can get some support for that. Certainly some support for your research, to get your research started until your first grants start to come in. You should be thinking about asking about all those things. Some of you undoubtedly have partners. It's certainly appropriate to ask for assistance to your partner in finding work locally. Or perhaps the institution could help out with a postdoc for your partner while he or she continues to look for appropriate work. Some of you may have kids. How about a subsidy for childcare for you? Or maybe there's your child has special needs. Maybe you could get some extra money to help you pay the costs of a particular special school that your child needs to attend. If you're not a citizen of the United States, you certainly would want to ask for help with, if not the complete payment of, the fees for an attorney who can help you complete your permanent residency application. That I hope gives you some sense of the range of things that can be on the table in a negotiation that aren't necessarily just about money. I would advise you against discussing salary or other compensation until you have an offer. I think people sometimes wonder about that. Don't bring up salary. You don't want to look like you're more interested in the money than you are in the job.
I'm sorry, Mary, I'm going to interrupt you at one point right there, because what if they ask you in the interview
What your
salary expectations are? How do you avoid bringing it up during that process?
I don't have an answer for that. I mean, if they want to know, the only thing I'd know is then before I went in, I'd have, I'm going to come back to this, so let me come back to it. I'm going to talk about prepping for the discussion about the salary negotiation, but if you think it's going to come up early, then I'd say you should have done your prep early, and a piece of that would be understanding something about the standard salaries, starting salaries in your discipline, right? You can get that kind of information. You want to know something about that. And then if they ask me my expectations, I'd start on the high side for sure, because it's not going to go up.
So you better have a number in your back pocket, even though you want to avoid it.
Yeah, it's a good question. You're absolutely right, of course. So everything is negotiable. And you're never in a better position to get what you want than you are when you're holding an offer that you have not yet accepted. Let me repeat that. Negotiate it now, because a year from now, you're not in nearly as good a position. If you decide you want something a year from now, 2 years from now, you're with them, you don't have the leverage that you have when you've got that initial offer. So negotiate. Learn to do it, which brings me to a few thoughts on negotiating. And again, let me repeat, I'm about as bad as they come in terms of negotiating, and I want to give you a quick life story in that connection. When I was offered the job of associate provost, I went down, I got this call, and the provost, called and said, would you come to my office, talk to me, I want to offer you a job, is actually what he said. I'm like, my heart's like, and I get down there, and he said, so I want to offer you a job, I'd like you to start in 3 weeks, and this is the salary I'm offering you. And he says this to me, and I'm processing it, and I thought, that's a lousy salary. That's a terrible salary. I can't believe that I'm making a move from what I'm doing now to this job with the level of responsibility and time I'm going to have to put in, and that's the salary he's offering me. And I smiled and said, great, I'll take it. I mean, how dumb is that? Okay. So, to return to the question you just asked, first of all, there's a few points here. You need to be prepared. Be prepared for salary negotiations, and maybe you need to be prepared even before you need to be prepared, huh? You should know something about current salaries in your field. It would be helpful if you know something about the cost of living in this new location that you can compare to Chicago. Maybe you don't need to make as much money in Timbuktu as you need to make in Chicago to have a decent life. You need to consider in advance other compensation factors that matter to you, which are essential and you don't want to give up on those essential ones, and which are optional or comparable. For instance, maybe 3,000 square feet of lab space is more important to you than $3,000 more in your salary. Or maybe building the library collections in Tamil might be more critical to you than teaching one less course per year. So there are different areas in which you can negotiate, but you need to understand what matters more, what matters less to you. You also need to understand your value to your potential employer. Maybe there's something special about you. You know, you're applying you have an offer in an English department, but you wrote a dissertation that was on English and the law, and they have a really good law school. Where could I be thinking of? And that connection that you can make to law makes you a really specially attractive candidate to that English department. So that's something you can leverage. Or maybe you have proprietary rights to a database that many scholars will wish to access. Or maybe you're an award-winning teacher, and this is a school where teaching is the currency of the day. Know what your value is. Don't underestimate your value. Don't underestimate the value of a University of Chicago degree. And be ambitious for yourself in negotiations. I would encourage you very much, too, if you know you're going into a salary negotiation, to script that conversation in advance, to really feel prepared so you don't kind of come apart at the seams while it's happening. In the second area, you need to listen. You need to listen well to what they offer, and you need to acknowledge the interests of the institution that's making the offer to you. Remember that the faculty in the department or school in which you have an offer have already invested a great deal of time and energy in settling on you as their choice. They're very committed to you. This gives you intrinsic leverage. But remember, too, that these individuals will be your colleagues for many years to come. This should make you wary of any outrageous demands. You know, they're not going to forget if you really asked for something crazy. See the situation from their side. How can you support the unit's goals? How can you help them address their problems? You've noticed while you've been interviewing that every faculty member in the whole department hates teaching the physics for non-major courses. And you think, gee, I wouldn't mind teaching the physics for dummy courses. That's cool for me. I'd be happy to do that for let's say, some additional support for the equipment that I need in my lab. How's that for a negotiating point for you? Or during the interviews, you recognized that there's really a need that they may not even know they have for a discussion group for underrepresented minority students inside the department. So perhaps you could propose to them that such a group be created and say that you'd like to lead it if they'd be willing to, say, pay you to attend a conference in Asia. You know, not a bad trade-off. Coming up with options that address their interests increases your value to them. And I didn't negotiate for this, but one of the teaching jobs I had, they asked me if I'd be interested in their at that time, slide library, image library was in really bad shape. And they said, you know, they really needed someone to build up the slide library. Well, I was going to be teaching art history, so building up the slide library was something I would have to do anyway. So I said, sure, I'd be happy to get it organized better and to see that it's built up. And they gave me one course relief for that. This was a really good trade-off for me. A third area, you should come into the discussion about salaries mindful of your job alternatives as you consider their offer. So what I'm saying is, what will you do if you don't reach agreement with them on an offer? If you don't accept this offer, do you have other academic job offers in play? Is there another career path that you find attractive and that maybe you just as soon pursue? Or are you going to go hungry this winter? You know, this has to affect, understanding those alternatives affects your ability to judge your negotiating power and your willingness to walk away from whatever offer they end up making to you. Finally, I want to offer a word especially for the women in this audience. There is lots of research indicating that women in general are more reluctant to negotiate for themselves than their male counterparts. Much, much more reluctant to negotiate for themselves. The result of this is an accumulation of disadvantages that are evidenced not only in lower salaries for the same job, but in negative effects on the range of other compensation items that I mentioned earlier. In many fields, women and underrepresented minorities are in very high demand. If you are one of these women or underrepresented minorities, use that leverage. Remember, this is something that can work to your advantage. Don't think in terms of the minimum you need. Think in terms of what your value is to your potential employer. And I recommend that women and men too consider skimming some books on negotiation. The kind of Bible of this, it goes back about 30 years, Getting to Yes. They use it in business schools all the time. It's good. It's good. It's good. For women, I particularly like Women Don't Ask, and the more recent volume by the same authors, Babcock and Lashover, Ask for It. It's really good, really simple, really straightforward, and walks you through the steps of getting ready to negotiate and actually doing the negotiation. And I'm sure everyone in this room would benefit from giving this book a look. Negotiating your first job offer is hardly going to be the last time that you're doing any negotiating, so it's really worth your time to learn how to do it well.
Thanks so much. That's a lot of consideration, a lot of factors to consider that go into your evaluation of a job offer that you are most certainly going to have. Michael, as Executive Director of Compensation and Benefits, how would you suggest that new workers or new candidates prioritize their compensation and benefit packages? Should they be looking strictly at salary? Should they evaluate a health care package, retirement options? And how should they think about their goals when they're looking at their first job?
First, I'd like to thank Mary for covering a good part of what I was going to talk about. So I'm just teasing. And the advice that Mary has provided and the input is critical. And I think the one thing that I would point out in the question that is asked of me, but in what Mary had said is, when you're at the offer stage, that is when you need to negotiate. I think when Mary mentioned that a year later, when your leverage is, you don't have any. It's pretty much gone. All your leverage is at that point, and I think that is a big takeaway from the session. And how do you evaluate that offer? And Mary had mentioned doing the research and doing your homework. Specifically on the question, what should you negotiate, particularly for, say, a non-academic position, a staff or something related to that, or going into a corporate environment. I'm going to back off and say things that are tough to negotiate are your benefits. The reason why I mention that is they're typically offered the same to everybody at the same time, so it's very hard to try to say I want a separate health plan that's not offered, or some kind of stipend to account for that health plan, or I want a little more in my retirement plan. And the reason for that is that health plans and retirement plans and a whole host of the benefits are governed by federal requirements. And they're also tax exempt. A lot of them you put your money away without taxes. And there's rules that just will handcuff a potential employer from allowing any kind of a variety on that. So in turning to is the question of what is more important, I would go back to, again, the whole host of things that Mary had mentioned, but when we're talking about salary, how do you get to that salary number? And I think a great question was brought up. Employers will definitely push you and corner you to see what your salary expectations are. And when you let out a number, they got you. Okay, that's part of the negotiation. And it's very easy to be just pleasant and share that. One of the things that I would focus on is turn the question around, so that you're now probing versus them, and say, well, what is the salary range or the expectations for this position? What do individuals like myself who come in here with X amount of experience typically make? And then if you have prepped in advance, there's numerous ways that you can do that. One is through understanding the roles that you're applying for through either your networking among colleagues and peers, and talking to different bosses in those areas, and trying to determine what is the appropriate pay for that job. There are tools online, and some of you might have heard of these. They are okay, and I caution people, because working in human resources, we're the intake. So one of the things that we get worried about is when someone quotes a salary from salary.com. That is and we got Huron Consulting here. They would probably coincide this with, when I work in compensation, I work with professional survey houses. We collect very robust data. There's a very stringent way. We provide all our employee data and we determine pay ranges for those jobs. So I think the key thing to turn that question around is asking the pay range. Now, realizing that if you go on a salary.com type of tool, that the number that you're going to pick up for the position that you type into that and geographic location is going to tell you a number that is sort of a point that you can use, but nothing that you would want to bring up specifically. The reason why I say that is that number is going to be for someone who is fully competent and working at their full capacity in that position. Typically about 5 years of experience. That's going to be the average that's going to show up in there. So if that number says it's $50,000, realize that that's what people fully competent 5 years who really know this and have a legacy of that work are getting paid. If you're brand new into that position and just trying to cut your teeth on the career and getting a position, those tools you have to take back and say, and again, when you ask the organization, what is your salary range? They're going to give you a range, and you're going to be on the lower end of that range. Because they're going to hire people in a range. So if it's 50,000, typically a range is going to be 20% on the low end, 20% on the high end. So 60,000 on the high end, and about 40,000 or 42,000 on the low end. Where your negotiation is going to be between the 42 and the 50. And that's really where your range is. And so there's opportunities to do that due diligence. I think one of the keys is that the number one is going back is this is your opportunity to negotiate. And there's never a bad counter. And that's coming from a human resource professional. You make that counter, basically it's setting the parameters.
Michael, I wanted to actually interrupt you at this point. You say there's never a bad counter, and I wanted to back it up a little bit. Is it a bad idea to stake out, will an employer hold it against a candidate who stakes out a position in a negotiation rather than do what Mary confessed on her own to having done, which is just accept what the employer offers? Is there a downside?
Again, coming from a human resource perspective, and we're a lot of the intake of this, I say no, it's an expectation. And I think that's key. And when we speak about women in not having the aggressive approach to negotiating, it is an expectation. And I will share just even a personal story with myself. I was a hard negotiator for a salary. I do compensation. I know what the position's worth. So I have an advantage over like 99.9% of anybody else. But I felt like at the end of the day, when I accepted the job, I beat them up. And I actually came in and I was going through paperwork and I said to the recruiter, gosh, I feel like, I really beat you guys up. And I was sort of joking. And she looked me in the eye and said, Mike, if you wouldn't have done it, we wouldn't have had respect for you. And that's really where, and I think that was early on in my career. And it stuck with me. And I will tell you, it's given me power over my career to ask and to negotiate. And I think that's key from day one. And going back to Mary's comment, that where you have the most leverage. We'll just take an easy number here, a $50,000 a year job. If you can negotiate $3,000 more, that is great. That is, and the reason why I share that with you is once you accept that job, you're now involved in what's called merit pay, where you get increases annually. And I will tell you that in Business America, those budgets for merit increases average between 2% and 3%. So if we take $50,000 and what's 2%, that's $1,000. That's a whole year for an increase. You'd have to go another whole year to get another. And so that's the perspective that you have to have. If you get $3,000, you literally have negotiated 2 or 3 years of increases in a corporate world of how pay is administered. And that can be very powerful if you go in with that mentality. I will say, because the question was on what do you negotiate, from my perspective, it would be the pay. On the academic side, it's very different, obviously, as Mary articulated, but benefits are very hard to negotiate. The things that you would negotiate related to benefits would be potentially time off, and that is something that can be negotiated, how many weeks of vacation. The other things could be work-life balance issues, which are flex schedules. It could be very important if you don't ask, especially for women who you're getting out of school, and maybe in the next 10 to 15 years, you might be going into the childbearing years. We see this. It's a natural part of who we are. And you want to determine whether you can build some flexibility in advance for that. Work from home, different hours. Can you come in early, leave early, have days off? I think those are other areas that are very negotiable. And the world has changed. I think employers are very much accepting that as a normal part of doing business. And work-life balance is key. Because if you're a great candidate and you become a great employee for this organization, they want you engaged. And if you're stressing out because you have to attend to something at 5 o'clock and they're keeping you to 4:45 when you could leave at 4 and come in at 7 or something, they want you engaged. They will be flexible. So with that, that's kind of my comments for the group here.
Thank you. Joy, I heard you say that throughout your years with the consultancy, you've had the opportunity to hire a lot of candidates and that you've done consulting to both education and healthcare. What's the biggest change that you have observed in the candidates that you hire, and how should that change that you've observed inform these participants' approach to their job search?
You know, I think if you think back about 15, 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of consulting firms focusing exclusively, especially on higher education. And so what would happen is those firms would kind of dabble in it. They would take some consultants that were maybe working on government jobs or some other industry and throw them on this job and think, oh, they'll figure it out. Well, I think higher education and healthcare organizations have become much savvier and now realize that they want to pay, they want consultants that really understand their business, their industry, their culture. And so we've seen where we've moved from a model of saying, let's just take traditional, undergrads in accounting or finance majors, train them and they'll be fine, to now saying, no, let's go find experienced professionals who understand and who have been in that academic or healthcare setting, and now let's bring them on it and have that expertise to offer. And so we now are going after a more experienced type of hire than maybe we would have, or at least the makeup of our consultants tend to be a little bit more experienced than the traditional. And so therefore, I think now the candidates are coming in with more experience, and I think therefore have more power to negotiate versus negotiating, or, we basically wouldn't negotiate with a 22-year-old just graduating with no work experience. Now they're coming with perhaps research experience, teaching experience, academic administration experience, and so it's a very different type of conversation from many years ago when you're just kind of bringing up the traditional undergrads. And so I think in some ways now all of you have a much better position to negotiate from, because you are coming in with that expertise, and firms like Huron need to continue to grow and expand and bring on experts like all of you. So you are in a much better position to negotiate. And I think, echoing some of the comments, it is tough. I think within corporate America, and not that Huron represents all corporations, but there aren't as many flexible things to negotiate. For instance, the healthcare is a perfect example. I think salary is the big component, though, that you can negotiate, or your level, which those typically go hand in hand. So where do you fall in that organization? I think what's a little bit different from academia is that you can likely expect, I would assume, probably larger fluctuations in your future income, where it might be higher raises per year. And so that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're kind of thinking, which way do I want to go? The upward potential in terms of salary is typically higher. And so you might need to start a little bit lower, but asking about, what are some typical bonuses? What are some typical, how many years to the next level? And understanding your career progression is really important, because you might say, well, 50,000 here is one thing, but you might end up, if you could get promoted quickly throughout your career, you might end up doubling that salary in, 5 or 10 years, whatever it might be, which might be very different than some of your other job alternatives. So you might be willing to start a little bit lower if you know there's greater upside in the next couple of years. So I think that's probably a little bit different nuance to keep in mind. And but I think your point about the merit increase, it definitely is based off of your first year of income. I think something else I've seen where maybe you can't, similar to academia, we've got those bands and ranges of comp. And I think we definitely do ask, I'll tell you to be prepared of what are your salary expectations. I know that's one of our recruiter first, and we're trying to find out, is there a total mismatch, a mismatch of expectations, and, just trying to manage that early on in the process so, there's not a waste of time.
Well, if a recruiter were to ask a candidate what his or her salary expectations are, and the candidate were to come back with some very modest expectation, and it turns out, and this is in an alternative universe, not the one we live in, and it turns out that the position is actually compensated at a much higher level, was that candidate bound by that first lowball number that they threw at themselves, or would you think that that entity would put that person where they belonged in their compensation structure? Maybe this is a question for you, Michael.
Yeah, I think
If we can get you cheap, we will.
Yeah, I think. I don't think
so
it's
you can do yourself a disservice by
I would definitely
lowballing
give
yourself.
a range. I would definitely give a range, and I would say do your research before you give that range out. And I think there's many different ways of just finding out that right range. I think it's also important to figure out which role you are most qualified for as well. So, there's a wide range of people, people's salary, I know at our company. So you got to figure out where do you fall in based on your work experience, and then try and figure out a general range, and it can be a broad range. I think what our recruiters are looking for is, how far off are we, and trying to manage that early on to make sure that, there's a mutual agreement and mutual interest to move forward. So I think that's one element. Secondly, if you can't come to an agreement, I know we try and stay within those bands per each of those levels, those ranges. Sometimes I have seen people successfully negotiate like a sign-on bonus, where or to negotiate moving expenses, things like that, support for education. That's something I've seen negotiated early on. But those are usually more productive ways. Those are usually things people, if you come back and ask for that, chances are you'll get some form of those types of requests. And most people do negotiate. Most people ask. And again, not looking for major swings. Usually if it's something reasonable within a couple percentage points of what the original offer is, most likely I would say you would get that, especially if you've, make sure you're doing this after you've gone through the interview process and you're excited about the job, and you've got everyone at the company excited to have you as well. That's one thing, is I wouldn't get too wound up about salary at the beginning of the process. Just make sure you're both in kind of that same range. But wait until after you've interviewed. Sometimes people get caught up in that mid-progress, and I think that tends to rub people the wrong way. I'll pause. I'm sure there's questions out in the audience, too.
Yeah, this seems like a good, I see you back there in the pink sweater is the first hand I saw.
Do you mind speaking?
Wait,
Excuse
hold
me,
on,
the
here
mic
comes
so
Brooke.
we get it on. Thanks. All right, so I was wondering if you're applying for non-academic jobs, if you have a PhD, but they'll be willing to accept people at master's or PhD level, should you expect to be offered a higher starting salary because of the PhD or not?
It's going to depend on the position requirements. I think that's the key, is within the job that you're applying for. If it says master's degree required, and you have a PhD, I think it's you're a better candidate than a person with a master's degree, typically. As far as that translating to pay, it can just depend on the position and the need. So there's not going to be typically a direct correlation, because they're going to tell it in the job description that you're applying for. It's going to have what's required. If you're If you have something that's beyond that, that is in your favor, obviously, and you're at a negotiating stage, I think it can help.
And as an advocate, I would tell you that your position going in the door is absolutely, it matters. And maybe you'll be disabused of that notion fairly quickly, but it would certainly be where the minimum requirement is a master's degree, and I had a PhD, my opening argument would be, I exceed your minimum qualifications, and therefore I am more valuable to you than a typical candidate. But that's only once they want you.
And your best negotiating is to try and highlight those unique, as Mary and others have said, those unique factors that you have throughout the interview process. Don't wait until the negotiating to highlight it. Try and incorporate that into your interview responses. That way, multiple people have heard, yeah, she's got this great experience, in this unique area. And so that way, when the hiring manager is going back and getting feedback and they're discussing, where you fit, there's multiple sources saying, yes, that would be such a great addition. Don't wait and hold back until that final negotiation to reveal some of your unique things that are important to you.
So and then the ivory sweater in the very back is next after, yeah. Or no, you go ahead.
I'll be graduating with my master's degree this year, and I was just wondering what kind of jobs should we be looking for if we have like a master's degree? So entry-level jobs, managerial positions, what would you recommend?
This to me?
Yes.
I would say, again, I think most job descriptions will have a good pointer on, what type of education experience. I think in the consulting world, it's tough to jump into a managerial level if you haven't been in consulting yourself. You'll probably get there quicker, especially if you're coming with, a master's degree and a very relevant subject matter expert. But don't try and jump there yet. In some ways, start at the level that you probably just don't have the consulting experience of managing, consultant teams, which is very different than managing other academia. And I would say start probably at a little bit lower level, most likely, but I would say your master's degree is probably going to have provided you skills that will help you rapidly get promoted to that next level. It really depends on the job description as well.
So I was wondering, what if you have a spouse or partner who's also looking for an academic job? How do you bring up the possibility, at what stage in your career is it okay to ask for the possibility that spouse have possibly get a job or maybe office space or lab space?
Yeah, of course, the department you're interviewing with can't ask you. That's illegal. So, it's a huge issue. It's probably the number one reason that we fail to hire people we want to hire because we can't find appropriate academic jobs for their partners. It is an issue, of course, not just for us, but for every school around the country. So it's kind of on everyone's minds. I don't think there's any point in pussyfooting around the fact that you have a partner who's going to need employment and that partner's an academic. In terms of trying to find a position inside the same institution, which is what you're proposing here, I'm not sure I'd want to bring that out too early. Depends on if it's a deal breaker for you, then there's no point in being shy about it. But if you have a partner who's going to be willing to look at other academic institutions in the area, or even to look outside of the academy, then I think you can make that clear. Am I providing you with enough of an answer? It's a tough call.
One thing you may already be aware of is that at a previous institution where I worked, there were a couple different universities in the area, and it was Purdue. It's a public university. They participated in a consortium with other employers, including other universities in the area. And the fact that they had a trailing spouse program was something you could have learned from their website. So I would recommend that as you're looking at institutions and places that you're applying, see whether their human resource tab on their website indicates that they have such an effort or that they participate in that kind of consortium, because then you'll just know going in without having to ask them.
That's a really good suggestion. And of course, many schools, this one included, have dual career offices where we assist with that. But when you've got academic partners who both want jobs,
Yeah.
particularly in the same institution, it's just really,
Yeah.
really tough.
Yeah.
And it's tough anyhow. If you're two partners, and so often academics are married to other academics in the same discipline. So you've got two physicists, and it's not like there's a ton of physics jobs, even in an area like Chicago with all the schools that are here, academic physics jobs. So it's just hard.
Yeah.
So this is a question about, I guess, the interpersonal nature of conducting a negotiation. When you have an offer on the table and you're positioned to start talking about things like salary, I guess I'm wondering how direct do you expect people to be? Not having gone through this process myself, it seems, I wonder, I mean, from the human resources perspective, obviously you've been through this many times, do you really expect people to say, I want more money, or I want this in exchange for this, or is it more political than that? Even advice about how to actually conduct the negotiation, I guess.
Well, how an offer typically will come in, and so the mechanics of that it can happen two ways typically. You usually get a call directly from the hiring manager. They'll reach out to you and say, hey, we want to offer you the position. Here's the salary we're going to offer you. And your response should be, well, thank you very much. And there's usually a 1 to 3 day kind of ticking clock for you to get back to them. And so your initial response is, well, thank you, I will review your offer. So it's sort of that formal acknowledgement. And then you typically get an email with a hard copy written letter or offer assigned with it. When you come back, you're dealing with a couple of things that we talked about, and that is, you have opportunity to research it, talk to people. Is that a good offer, not a good offer? And it could be a phenomenal offer. It could be really, really good, more than you expected. I would also say then, there's nothing wrong to say, can I get, what I was really looking for is, and you pick $5,000 more, and they might just split it in half, and you spent a total of 17 seconds and 1 sentence and just got $2,500. It's almost that simplistic, the approach. The things that Mary addressed are very much more of a dialogue oriented, where the pay, you can ask questions. I think there's nothing wrong with, how did you come to the offer you did for me? And then they give you, so that could be, after you say thank you, that could be your next question the next day. And then what they'll do is they might give you the range, they might give you some more information. We looked at you, and then you could come back and say, well, I really believe I offer a little more than the average candidate here, and here's why, and we focused on these, and then you have your next kind of counter to them, and that's the typical approach. So it occurs over a couple days, but you're just basically asking for more, very directly in either an email or a call.
I think, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I think you can be very explicit by saying, I had hoped for a better salary than that. And I also think that Michael's suggestion that you ask what the basis of the offer is a very good one, because that tells you where you can come back and counter. Because then you can come back and say, you didn't consider this experience of mine, or I think what differentiates me from this individual is this. But I don't think that there's a downside in being direct, because everybody really knows that that's what it's about,
And there's employers will convey the fact, because again, it's a negotiation, that this is we're giving you the best offer on that first letter or that email. And they're going to convey that. Well, we don't like, and they'll be very subtle in interviews or till you get to that point. But you'll pick up that, and you'll think, God, this is the best offer they're going to give me. And they'll sort of like put that in your head. And they're doing it on purpose. And you sort of have to just forget about that, and because they will negotiate.
I just want to point out we are at time, so maybe we want to take 2 or 3 more questions. Is that okay? Oh, gosh. I already promised one question right here, so.
No problem.
No problem.
When you are at the point of discussing benefits, how it's a little bit on this bordering on the same question. How would you word it, or how would you phrase it? I would like to know about your child aid or moving expenses, or I would need to have support on moving expenses. How assertive or how aggressive should your wording be?
I think, again, you should be fairly direct and say, here are some things, additional things that are important to me outside of the base compensation, and outline, I wouldn't come with a list of 20 things, but highlight the top 3 or, however many that you have, and be very direct. I think the key in negotiations is to be very calm. I think to show like, hey, I'm thinking about this, but I'm not sold yet, and not overly emotional about it. I think being calm and clear in what your request is helps them understand what's most important to you, and being clear of which ones are deal breakers and which ones aren't. Because I know as the hiring manager, when the recruiter tells me how the conversation went, I'm trying to figure out, well, do we have to give on all of these, or what's most important to them, so we understand what we need to focus on. Because chances are, again, you can always ask for a longer list. You may not get it all, but at least you're being very clear. But be direct and let them know this is something that's important to me. Explain a little bit about your situation too. Certainly telling them about your children or special needs. Be very direct on that. It will only help you, I think. I wouldn't go on and on and on. I'd make it fairly clear and direct. But I think telling the whole story is important.
Once you have the offer.
Correct. Good point. Yeah.
And this is really, really, you do not want to look like a world of trouble in the interview process. So,
Right.
Of course, you're going to advocate on your own behalf. And, of course, everybody has their own expectations. But to the extent that you can streamline the conversation and wait until you have the offer, that is the best strategy.
Yeah, I will tell you, we get concerned if we have candidates who are asking a lot of detailed benefit questions during the interview when you're actually interviewing a potential, a supervisor, someone. I know a lot of times we say you can talk to the recruiter about some of those details. So I would say definitely wait and have those conversations with the recruiter. You don't want it to distract from them, you sharing your true strengths and the things you'd be bringing to the job. It could become a real distraction if you do that during the interview.
Burning question,
There's one couple more here.
What demeanor should you have? Like, should you have a poker face? Should you be smiling? You know what I mean? Like, should you be walking in like, yeah. So
I think that people see through any kind of assumed demeanor. So if you go throughout your life doing business with a smile on your face and you are an approachable and open person, for you to try to adopt a poker face would be false and would not be a successful strategy for you. But that doesn't mean you accept an offer when it's given to you. So I think your demeanor should be however it is in your life, but without committing. What do you guys think?
I'd say be your professional yourself. Whatever the professional demeanor you have naturally, that's what I would say to try and take that on.
I've had candidates like laugh and giggle negotiating because they're nervous and that's their natural style. That's completely okay because we want to hire genuine people that we spend so much time together. It's the relationship, and you can accept that, and that's okay. And there are the poker face, and it's whoever you are. I would agree.
I think the relationship word is really important here because it's really your first transaction of trust with your future employer, and so just making sure you're being genuine and not trying to be a jerk in the process, and hopefully that recruiter and the hiring manager is reciprocating that same type of trusting relationship.
Well, please join me in thanking the panelists and moderator today. It's a really great discussion.